The familiar, comforting chime of the brass-themed tune fades into the crisp morning air over Weatherfield, where a pale northern sun is just beginning to glint off the damp slate roofs of the terrace houses. On Coronation Street, the day begins not with a dramatic burst of action, but with the slow, synchronized awakening of a community bound by decades of shared history, secrets, and a unique brand of gallows humor. The camera pans down from the chimney pots, tracking past the dark brick facade of the Rover's return, before settling on the misted windows of Roy's Rolls. Inside, the ambient hum of the commercial toaster and the gentle hiss of the coffee machine provide a rhythmic backing track to the early morning rush. Roy Cropper moves behind the counter with his characteristic, meticulous precision, wiping down the polished formica surfaces with a clean damp cloth, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration as he mentally calculates the day's inventory of black pudding and white sliced loaves. Shona Platt stands near the pastry display, her posture slightly slumped from a long week of juggling family drama and cafe shifts, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her apron. The bell above the door gives a sharp, cheerful ring, breaking the hushed atmosphere as Carla Connor steps inside, wrapped in a sharp, tailored trench coat that seems entirely too sophisticated for the damp grayness of a Manchester Friday. Carla's heels click sharply against the linoleum floor, a sound that immediately draws Roy's eyes upward from his task. He offers her a small, tight smile of genuine warmth, noting the slight shadow of exhaustion beneath her dark eyes, a telltale sign that the ongoing supply chain issues at Underworld are continuing to take their toll on her nerves. Carla sighs deeply, leaning against the counter and ordering her usual extra-strong black coffee, her voice carrying that familiar, smoky rasp that has commanded boardroom meetings and pub arguments alike for years. As Roy prepares the beverage with the deliberate care of a chemist, Shona leans in to offer a bit of neighborhood gossip, mentioning that she saw Sarah Platt lurking near the late-night off-license the evening before, looking distinctly disheveled and checking her phone every few seconds. Carla's expression hardens slightly at the mention of the Platt family, her mind instantly pivoting to the fragile state of factory finances and the personal entanglements that always seem to threaten the stability of her business. She thanks Roy, takes the steaming mug, and retreats to a corner booth, pulling out her tablet to review the latest fabric invoices, though her gaze repeatedly wanders out the window to the cobblestones outside, where the first real signs of neighborhood life are starting to manifest. Across the street, the front door of number 8 opens with a sudden, aggressive jerk, and David Platt emerges into the chilly air, clutching a half-empty mug of tea and looking thoroughly exasperated. He turns back to shout a final, scathing remark into the dark hallway behind him, his voice carrying clearly across the street, complaining about the sheer volume of laundry left on the stairs and the general lack of respect he receives in his own home. Max Turner follows him out a moment later, his headphones draped around his neck and his eyes glued to his phone screen, completely ignoring his stepfather's rant as he adjusts his backpack and begins the walk toward his media course. David watches him go with a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair and muttering under his breath about the younger generation's complete inability to make eye contact before he takes a long, stabilizing gulp of his tea. He is joined on the pavement by Gail Rodwell, who is wrapped in a thick, quilted lavender cardigan that looks as though it has survived several decades of family crises. Gail looks anxious, her hands fluttering near her collar as she asks David if he has heard anything from Nick regarding the latest plumbing disaster at the bistro, or if Sarah has managed to clean up her act before the big meeting with the design consultants later that afternoon. David gives a cynical snort, telling his mother that Sarah is currently about as reliable as a chocolate teapot and that if anyone wants anything done properly around here, they usually have to wait for someone else to fail first. Gail reprimands him for his negativity, her voice slipping into that familiar, long-suffering maternal whine that has echoed through the walls of number 8 since the late 70s, though her eyes betray a deeper, more profound worry for her daughter's emotional well-being. Meanwhile, the doors of the Rover's return open as Jenny Connor steps out onto the step to shake out the heavy doormat, her blonde curls bouncing slightly in the breeze. She looks across at Gail and David, offering a brief, polite wave before turning her attention to the pub's exterior, checking the hanging baskets for any signs of frost damage from the night before. Inside the bar, the atmosphere is cool and redolent of stale beer and furniture polish, the traditional morning scent of a British public house. Daisy Midgley is already behind the bar, though she is far more interested in her reflection in the polished brass of the beer pumps than in preparing for the lunchtime trade. She is busy adjusting her makeup, her bright pink lipstick contrasting sharply with the dim, dark wood of the pub interior, her mind clearly elsewhere as she contemplates her latest social media campaign for a local boutique. The quiet of the pub is interrupted by the arrival of Ryan Connor, who emerges from the back kitchen carrying a crate of empty tonic bottles, his shoulders tense and his face pale. There is an unspoken awkwardness between Ryan and Daisy, a lingering remnant of past romantic entanglements and shared trauma that makes every shared space feel slightly pressurized. Daisy looks up from her mirror, her expression shifting from vanity to a guarded kind of sympathy as she asks him how his physiotherapy session went the previous afternoon. Ryan drops the crate with an unnecessarily loud clatter, muttering that it went about as well as could be expected given that his arm still feels like it belongs to someone else half the time. He avoids her gaze, busying himself with rearranging the packets of crisps on the back display, his movements jerky and filled with a restless, frustrated energy that Daisy knows better than to challenge too directly. Back outside, the street is becoming busier as the working day truly begins. Tyrone Dobbs emerges from the garage, his greasy blue overalls unzipped to the waist to reveal a faded gray t-shirt, a heavy wrench slung carelessly over his shoulder. He looks stressed, his face smeared with a streak of black engine oil as he walks toward the cabin to grab a morning paper and a pack of mints. Inside the small newsagent's, Brian Packham is behind the counter, meticulously straightening a stack of local magazines and chatting amiably with Rita Tanner, who sits in her usual spot on the stool behind the counter, wrapped in a glamorous faux fur coat and looking every inch the legendary street matriarch. Rita's sharp eyes take in Tyrone's disheveled appearance instantly, and she asks after the girls, wanting to know if Hope is still causing a stir at school with her self-made internet videos or if things have finally calmed down at number 9. Tyrone groans, leaning against the counter and telling Rita that Hope is currently convinced she is the next big true crime podcaster and has spent the last 3 nights trying to interview the neighbors about historic local burglaries. Brian chuckles, suggesting that perhaps the young lady has a future in investigative journalism, but Tyrone does not see the funny side, explaining that Fizz is at her wits' end trying to monitor what the girl is uploading to the internet. Rita offers a wise, knowing smile, reminding Tyrone that children with a bit of spark always give you the most gray hairs, but they usually turn out alright in the end if you keep a tight rein on them. Tyrone thanks her, buys his items, and heads back out onto the cobbles, nearly colliding with Evelyn Plummer, who is marching down the street with her loyal hound, Ruby, trotting alongside her. Evelyn stops dead in her tracks, glaring at Tyrone and demanding to know why the dynamic duo at the garage haven't yet looked at the strange rattling noise coming from her small hatchback. Tyrone tries to explain that they have 3 cars up on the ramps ahead of her, including an emergency repair for a local delivery van, but Evelyn is entirely unmoved by his excuses. She informs him in no uncertain terms that her mobility is paramount and that if she is stranded over the weekend because of a faulty exhaust, she will be taking her custom elsewhere, regardless of family loyalty. Tyrone sighs, knowing that arguing with Evelyn is a battle that nobody has ever won, and promises to have Kevin look at it before the garage closes for the weekend, a concession that Evelyn accepts with a sharp, imperious nod before she continues her march toward the butcher's shop. Down at the precinct, the atmosphere is distinct from the domestic warmth of the main street, characterized by the harsher architectural lines of the concrete shopping center and the louder, more urban sounds of traffic from the main road. Gary Windass is standing outside his furniture shop, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he watches a group of teenagers loitering near the empty unit next door. His expression is wary, his past life as a loan shark and a fixer leaving him with a permanent instinct for spotting trouble before it lands on his doorstep. Maria Connor approaches him from the direction of the town hall, her arms full of council folders and her face flushed with political fervor. She immediately starts talking about the new local environmental initiative she is trying to push through the planning committee, her enthusiasm blinding her to Gary's obvious distraction. Gary blinks, forcing his attention back to his wife and offering a supportive nod, though his eyes keep darting back to a dark saloon car parked across the street, its engine idling and its windows heavily tinted. Maria notices his lack of focus and stops mid-sentence, dropping her files onto a nearby bench with a theatrical sigh of exasperation. She asks him plainly what is wrong, demanding to know if some ghost from his past has decided to show its face again or if he is simply bored by the intricacies of local government recycling policy. Gary forces a laugh, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and kissing the top of her head, assuring her that he is completely invested in her political career but that he just has a lot on his mind regarding the rent renewals for the shop premises. Maria looks at him skeptically, her intuition telling her that he is hiding something, but before she can press him further, her phone rings, forcing her to answer a call from a demanding council colleague. Back on Coronation Street, the afternoon sun begins to cast long, dramatic shadows across the cobblestones, signaling the transition from the morning routine to the high-stakes encounters of the late day. Sarah Platt is finally visible, walking quickly down the street toward Underworld, her heels clicking rapidly as she tries to make up for lost time. She is dressed in a smart corporate outfit, but her hair is slightly untidy, and her expression is a mix of panic and fierce determination. She pushes open the glass doors of the factory, stepping into the noisy, bustling environment of the sewing floor, where the machines are clattering at full speed. Kirk Sutherland passes her carrying a heavy roll of denim fabric, offering a cheerful hello that Sarah barely acknowledges as she storms past the rows of machinists toward the glass-fronted office where Carla is waiting. Inside the office, Carla looks up from her paperwork, her expression entirely unreadable as Sarah enters and shuts the door behind her with a sharp click. Sarah immediately launches into an apology, spinning a complicated tale about a delayed tram and a missing file, but Carla cuts her off with a single, raised hand. Carla tells her flatly that she doesn't care about the tram or the file. What she cares about is the fact that their primary European distributor has just threatened to pull out of their exclusivity contract because the design specifications are 3 days overdue. Sarah blanches, her confidence evaporating as she realizes the severity of the situation. She insists that she has the designs ready on her laptop and that they just need a final review, but Carla leans back in her leather chair, her eyes boring into Sarah as she asks if her personal life is once again interfering with her professional obligations. The tension in the office is palpable, a cold war of words between two women who have both loved and lost the same men, and who share a mutual respect that is constantly undermined by their competitive natures. Sarah defends herself fiercely, stating that her personal life is perfectly stable and that she has given everything to this factory over the last 12 months. Carla doesn't back down, pointing out that dedication isn't measured in hours spent screaming at people down the phone in the corridor, but in results delivered on time to the clients who keep the lights on. She gives Sarah an ultimatum: either the designs are finalized and sent by 5 o'clock, or Carla will take over the account herself, a move that would effectively strip Sarah of her authority within the company and relegate her to a secondary role. Outside the office, on the factory floor, the machinists are completely aware of the drama unfolding behind the glass. Sally Metcalf leans across her machine to whisper to Izzy Armstrong, her voice dripping with judgmental glee as she speculates on what exactly Sarah has done wrong this time. Sally remarks that ever since the whole business with Damon, Sarah hasn't been right in the head, and that Carla has a business to run regardless of anyone's emotional crises. Izzy tells her to keep her voice down, pointing out that Sarah has had a mountain of pressure on her lately with the kids and the family, but Sally remains unsympathetic, stating that in the professional world, one must leave one's domestic baggage at the factory gates. Sean Tully joins the conversation, holding a tray of plastic cups filled with water, and adds his own 2 cents, whispering that he saw Sarah arguing with a mysterious man near the tram station earlier in the week, a comment that sets Sally's gossiping mind into overdrive. Meanwhile, at the Rovers, the lunchtime crowd has begun to filter in, filling the small pub with the warm chatter of local residents looking to unwind before the weekend. Ken Barlow sits quietly in the corner booth, a half-pint of bitter in front of him and a thick historical biography open on the table. He is the picture of elder statesman tranquility, a sharp contrast to the chaotic energy of the younger patrons around him. Tracy McDonald enters through the main door, her presence instantly shifting the dynamic in the room as she marches over to her father's table and drops her handbag onto the leather seat. She looks thoroughly annoyed, complaining loudly about the price of wholesale flowers and Steve's complete lack of assistance with the shop's bookkeeping. Ken looks up from his book with a patient, practiced smile, suggesting that perhaps Steve is simply occupied with his taxi duties, but Tracy is having none of it, declaring that Steve's primary duty seems to be sitting on the sofa watching old cricket matches while she does all the heavy lifting. Steve MacDonald himself enters the pub just in time to hear the end of her complaint, his face falling into that comical expression of wounded innocence that he wears like armor. He approaches the table, holding his car keys and protesting that he has just spent the last 3 hours driving a demanding hen's party all the way to Manchester Airport and back, an experience that he claims has left him emotionally scarred. Tracy scoffs, telling him that driving a car is hardly manual labor and that he should try standing on his feet all morning dealing with bridezillas who can't tell the difference between a rose and a peony. The argument begins to escalate in typical MacDonald fashion, with Ken watching them with a mixture of amusement and deep resignation, knowing that their bickering is simply the language of their affection, however dysfunctional it might appear to an outsider. At the bar, Dev Allahan is busy holding court, loud and performative as always, as he tries to impress Bernie Winter with his latest business statistics for the corner shop chain. Dev gesticulates wildly, his voice booming across the room as he explains his new marketing strategy involving loyalty cards and discounted snack promotions. Bernie looks entirely unimpressed, sipping her gin and tonic and occasionally nodding just enough to keep him talking while she focuses on her own thoughts. She is clearly worried about Paul and the family, the ongoing emotional weight of their situation never far from her mind, making Dev's corporate grandstanding feel entirely trivial by comparison. When Dev finally pauses for breath, Bernie looks him dead in the eye and asks if his loyalty cards can buy back a person's dignity, a philosophical question that leaves Dev utterly speechless and blinking in confusion as Bernie drains her glass and walks out into the afternoon sunshine. The scene shifts down to the builder's yard, where Ed Bailey is sorting through a stack of timber, his movements slow and deliberate as he battles against the persistent ache in his lower back. He looks tired, the financial strains of the past few years having left their mark on his face, though there is still a glimmer of the proud family man in his eyes. Dee Dee Bailey walks into the yard, her legal robes draped over her arm and her face alive with professional energy. She has just come from the magistrate's court and is eager to share her latest victory with her father, explaining how she managed to get a client off on a technicality that the prosecution completely overlooked. Ed listens with pride, a genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion as he tells her that she is the best thing to happen to the legal profession in this city for a generation. Their moment of celebration is cut short by the arrival of Michael Bailey, who looks anxious and is holding an official-looking brown envelope. He approaches his sister and father, his voice hushed as he asks Dee Dee if she can take a look at a letter he has just received regarding the intellectual property rights for his latest design project. Michael explains that a former business partner is claiming a percentage of his future earnings, a revelation that causes Ed's smile to vanish instantly, his old anxieties about family security rushing back to the surface. Dee Dee takes the letter, her professional mask dropping into place as she scans the text, her brow furrowing as she realizes that the legal language is deliberately aggressive and could pose a real threat to Michael's financial independence if not handled with absolute precision. Back at Underworld, the clock on the wall is ticking dangerously close to 5 o'clock, and the atmosphere inside the office has reached a boiling point. Sarah is typing furiously on her laptop, her face flushed and her eyes bloodshot from hours of intense focus. Carla stands behind her, looking over her shoulder at the screen, her arms crossed and her face grim as she monitors every correction and adjustment. Sarah's fingers fly across the keys as she makes the final changes to the summer clothing line designs, her breath hitching slightly as she fears she won't make the deadline. With 3 minutes to spare, she hits the send button, the screen displaying a confirmation message that the files have been uploaded to the client's server. Sarah sinks back into her chair, completely drained, and looks up at Carla, waiting for a word of validation or relief. Carla looks at the screen for a long, silent moment, before finally nodding her head in approval. She tells Sarah that the designs are acceptable and that she has managed to save the contract by the skin of her teeth, but she adds that this kind of last-minute drama cannot become the norm. She tells Sarah to go home, get some rest, and ensure that she comes in on Monday morning with her head screwed on properly, because the company cannot survive another week of chaos. Sarah doesn't say a word, she simply packs her things into her leather bag, gives Carla a curt nod, and walks out of the office, her face a mask of exhaustion and suppressed anger as she exits the factory into the cool evening air. As Sarah walks down the street, she passes the Rover's Return, where the outdoor benches are now filled with patrons enjoying the Friday evening sunshine. The mood on the street is shifting into the weekend, with laughter and the clinking of glasses echoing off the brick walls. But for Sarah, and for many of the residents of Coronation Street, the weekend brings no guarantee of peace, only the continuation of the silent struggles, hidden agendas, and emotional fault lines that define life in this corner of Weatherfield. The camera tracks Sarah as she walks toward the corner of the street, her silhouette long against the cobblestones, as the first chapter of this Friday evening draws to a close under a darkening sky.